It may happen in the center of Tibet, religion and government will be attacked both from without and from within. Unless we can guard our own country, it will now happen that the Dalai and Panchen Lamas, the Father and the Son, and all the revered holders of the faith will disappear and become nameless. Monks and their monasteries will be destroyed. The spiritual leader of Tibet, the 13th Dalai Lama's written words echoed through the country in 1932, a year before his death. His predicted conflict tragically became the truth to millions of peaceful Tibetans. For 1,300 years, since the 6th century, the Tibetan people had maintained their unique religion, culture, and government. Then in the fall of 1950, the Tibetans' independence was lost to the Chinese. Since the invasion, Tibet has been seeking to regain its separate culture and religion through a compromise. From ancient times, Tibet could not avoid conflict. It was invaded and attacked by those seeking to gain control over its land and people. This included the Mongols, Nepalese, the Chinese, and the British. Each invader left Tibet in disorder. However, up until the 20th century, Tibet had managed to expel the various invaders by force or compromise.
Though Tibet and China resolved many previous conflicts, they had still not resolved the conflicts regarding their borders and controlling factors by the early 20th century. China had slowly moved its borders outward into Tibet, taking over some of Tibet's Ando and Kham provinces. Then, in 1913, the British, who had also invaded Tibet, held a similar conference in which they hoped to settle the Chinese-Tibet border dispute. However, the Chinese nationalists, or Kuomintang government, refused to sign the agreement, leaving undecided issues such as the border of both countries and whether or not Tibet was part of China. 35 years later, in 1949, Mao Zedong, the leader of China's Communist Party, and his followers overthrew the Chinese nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek, naming the new communist government the People's Republic of China. Under Chairman Mao's rule, the People's Liberation Army invaded eastern Tibet in October 1950. Mao stated that he wished to peacefully liberate Tibet from Western influences and culture under Chinese rule. What Mao really intended was to bring Tibet under the control of the People's Republic of China without compromise. Because of the Chinese conflict, Tibet urgently needed a leader to become the head of state. Therefore, it was necessary to bring Tenzin Gyatso, the next Dalai Lama, into power 2 years before the traditional 18 years. He soon wrote the first appeal to the United Nations in 1950. However, the UN did not reply to the Dalai Lama's plea for help. They did not want to assist because they believed Communist China would attack Tibet and attempt to take it over. Countries such as the US and Great Britain only stated, "The Chinese action was a violation of international law and an unjustified act of aggression." However, they did nothing more. A year later, Tibet realized that it would not receive any help from the outside world, and was forced to compromise with the People's Republic of China. On May 23, 1951, the Sino-Tibetan Agreement, also known as the 17-Point Agreement, was signed. The agreement gave the People's Republic of China control over Tibet's foreign relations and military, with the promise that China will let Tibet keep its language, political, and religious system under the rule of the Dalai Lama. Following the agreement, the Chinese moved swiftly, bringing in troops to gain full military control of Tibet. In 1954, the 14th Dalai Lama, along with the great religious scholar, the Panchen Lama, visited Beijing upon the request of Chairman Mao Zedong. After returning in 1955 from his meeting with Chairman Mao, the Dalai Lama was hopeful for his country, for Mao had talked about his longing to help Tibet modernize. Yet, when the Dalai Lama returned from China, he was disturbed at what he saw.
The People's Liberation Army posted in Tibet had been seizing the already insufficient food supply for their own, leaving Tibetans to starve. By the end of 1954, the Chinese established the Unified Preparatory Committee that undermined the authority of the Dalai Lama. This only allowed the Tibetan government to exist by treating it like a puppet government. The Chinese more forcibly imposed their communist ideals. Anger among the Tibetans grew over the Chinese takeover because they did not want any foreign invader to control their land, religion, culture, or government. In 1959, a massive rebellion broke out in Lhasa. The Dalai Lama realized that a peaceful compromise inside Tibet was over. On March 17, 1959, seeing the dangerous situation developing around him, his advisors saw no alternative but to urgently seek his escape from Tibet, where he could not be taken or killed by the Chinese. They took gold along with them to support the exiled government that they would later set up in India. 20 people, such as family and important Tibetan government officials, traveled with him into exile. After the Dalai Lama escaped, there was a major uprising in Lhasa that failed. Tens of thousands were killed and thousands fled the country. These events in history are commemorated each year. Following the Lhasa uprising on March 28, 1959, the Chinese disbanded Tibet's government and took away lands from monasteries and nobility. Then in 1965, the Chinese established the Tibet Autonomous Region. The TAR was a much smaller part of Tibet. However, a year later, in 1966, China imposed a cultural revolution in China and Tibet. During this period, more than 5,000 monasteries in Tibet were destroyed. Manuscripts were burned, and secret stone texts were used to pave streets. The Chinese then declared that the Dalai Lama was an enemy of the Tibetan people, and forced Tibet to renounce him. Many monks and nuns who protested against the Chinese were imprisoned, tortured, or executed. In some provinces, China enforced a harsh plan of population control. Women and young girls were sterilized, and pregnant women were given abortions.
A Chinese publication stated in 1975 that the peaceful liberation of Tibet gave the region a new lease on life. Since then, the once downtrodden masses have led a free, happy life. However, according to the International Commission of Jurists report, 3 allegations of Chinese abuse were stated: the disregard of obligations under the 17-Point Agreement of 1951, the violation of the fundamental rights and freedoms of the people of Tibet, and unjustifiable killing of Tibetans. This made it necessary to consider the question of genocide. After Chairman Mao's death in 1976, his successor, Deng Xiaoping, loosened some of Tibet's restrictions. On the 25th of January 1978, spiritual leaders were released from prison, giving Tibet some religious freedom back. However, the Chinese still did not want to leave Tibet, nor did they have any intention of giving power to the exiled Dalai Lama. In the last 47 years, the exiled Tibetan government established schools, healthcare centers, and refugee settlements in Dharmasala, North India, and Kathmandu, Nepal, to help the 195,000 Tibetans who have escaped Tibet. Today, there are more Chinese than Tibetans living in Tibet. The Dalai Lama would like the Chinese population inside Tibet to compromise, asking the Chinese to go back to China. Few people in the world today believe that Tibet will ever be free, and doubt that the Dalai Lama will be able to compromise with China, who killed 1.2 million of his people. However, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has visited presidents and prime ministers to help raise support for Tibet's independence and arousing awareness of his country's conflict. He has won many awards from many countries, including the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989 and his recent 2007 U.S. Congressional Gold Medal of Honor that upset the Chinese greatly. The current leader of China's Communist Party, Jiang Qingli, stated, "We are furious if the Dalai Lama can receive such an award. There must be no justice or good people in the world."
The greatest honor for us is that recently you all know that His Holiness got the gold medal in Washington, D.C., and he met the President Bush, So that is the greatest honor for us, Thank you very much.
The Dalai Lama's organizations have set up offices in many different countries as they spread crucial information on the events in Tibet today. The Dalai Lama has proposed many compromises, as in 1963 when he proposed a compromise of new boundaries for Tibet.
Dalai Lama is actually trying to offer what he calls a middle way approach, where he is willing to still talk and compromise and work with the Chinese and to find a peaceful way to actually resolve these differences.
However, the largest compromise that the Dalai Lama made was escaping his country in 1959, leaving his land and people. He left them in the hands of the invader. Many Tibetans pleaded that he stay and continue the conflict with the Chinese. However, he opposed any violent means to free Tibet. So he withdrew as political leader but kept his authority as the spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. It was a compromise that he felt he had to make to save his culture and country. At least 2,000 refugees a year escape from Tibet. The Dalai Lama continues to fight for his people and culture, and without his voice, the Tibetan culture would fade, because the communist Chinese want to maintain the conflict by not letting go of Tibet. The Dalai Lama compromises through peaceful actions and forgiveness for the Chinese atrocities, but continues to confront the conflict and declares, "We Tibetans have an equal right to maintain our own distinctive culture, as long as we do not harm others. Materially we are backward, but in spiritual matters, in terms of the mind, we are quite rich."